it's a big deal to talk about beginnings, I think. And I think there's a lot of things that resonated for me in what you were saying about that own beginning, and also, Steve, in the quote that you were reading about Heartwood being in between stories, and that really the reality is that we're constantly going through these new beginnings. Because Heartwood is so much the staff that are there that help to grow it. So there's a constant kind of like iteration and cyclical reshaping that happens within Heartwood. So I think for me, having started at Heartwood in September, I came in at an interesting time, and since I've been there, I think there's been some interesting transitions and things that have happened with Heartwood. So I really do feel like we're at this place of navigating the new beginning and what that looks like. But knowing that it's not a completely new beginning, and that obviously there's pieces that are carried forward, but that we are in this space of navigating the new beginning. To start at me, I think Heartwood has fully embraced me and all of my questions and boldness, and just the ability to take on somebody new who is not from Nova Scotia, who had not spent a significant amount of time in Canada for the past few years, and to embrace that person within the organization and allow me to bring who I am and the things that I'm passionate about and the experiences that I've had, and allow those to connect into the work that we're doing here in a really meaningful and concrete way. And I think over the past few months, I've realized that the work, and Steve said, well, I realized this when I looked at your resume, but it hadn't connected with me, but that the work that I had done abroad, and just in a lot of different realms and areas of my life, is all connecting at Heartwood. I honestly, I don't think there's not a piece of it that isn't relevant and that doesn't make sense for me to bring into this work, and to bring into the teams that I work with and the youth that we work with. And that's really special. That's really, really important. And I don't really think a lot of people have the opportunity to find that place where that can happen. So yeah, I think that's something to really be remarked upon, and that's really important in this work and in this organization, the culture that Heartwood has created, that I can enter into that, and that I can learn the Heartwood culture as I go along, but that Heartwood culture also includes me. And that I can shape that culture, and that Heartwood wouldn't be as good if we all didn't do that. And that's what makes Heartwood, is us shaping that culture and bringing who we are. So so it's a really important thing for me. And so when you said okay, it took 2 people to begin this, but then it took every single person to grow it, I still very much think that that's happening. As something that I brought along that's on the table there, is this just a little homemade piece of art that says, "If we are bold." The story behind this is, thank you, one of my best and closest friends, who is the social justice activist I aspire to be. This is a tattoo that she has, "If we are bold." And I have this up by my desk, or at least I did, and then it somehow migrated over to the Kate and Nicole corner, which I'm totally fine and okay with, because if it resonated with you, then I'm happy. That it one day just appeared to be on that side of the office. But I think this is really important, and I think this is part of that, navigating the new beginnings and that deepening and strengthening of Heartwood that happens. It's if we are bold, and not being afraid to dream that stuff and imagine where we can be and do that visioning and have that be an integral part of what we do all the time.
That's
yeah.
exactly what we did when
Yeah.
we started Heartwood.
Yeah, you were bold.
If you are bold,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Oh, yeah, I guess.
Yeah.
And it's so cool that you're the same age now that we
Yeah.
were when we started Heartwood, and you're exactly as old as Heartwood is, or as young.
That worked out well. Yeah. So for me, this is a really important piece of, I think, where I feel some of where we're at right now with Heartwood is if we are bold, and daring to ask and daring to dream and go there. So this story kind of goes back to Fall Summit, which was the first really big emotional, concrete shared work experience of leaders of today that I had after I started. The Fall Summit was like the big kahuna, okay, you're diving into it. And a youth who's 15? 15. So Annie came to Fall Summit and worked with Laura. That's right. Laura was integral in bringing Annie to Summit. So there you go. There's a full circle for you. So Annie came to Fall Summit and hosted a conversation. And it was a small conversation. There's maybe only 5 or 6 people there. Hosted a conversation around questioning why there weren't more Indigenous identified youth that Annie was seeing involved in leadership today. And Annie is Indigenous identified herself. And so she held a conversation around that and said, like, I know so many people up in Cape Breton where she lives that would benefit from being here. And I'm not seeing them here. I'm not seeing us represented. And I want to make this happen. So Annie held that conversation. She held a Pro Action Cafe conversation and said, I want an Indigenous Youth Leaders of Today Summit. I want that to happen. And it was something that really resonated with me and with Steve and with some other folks we were working with. And so we prioritized that as one of the big actions that we wanted to make happen. And so it took another few meetings and some reminding of like the essence of where that's coming from and who should be involved and what does this team look like and, you know, let's do this right. Let's be true to the essence of why this conversation was being called. And in the end of April, we had an Indigenous youth gathering at the Friendship Center, the Mi'kmaq Friendship Center in Halifax. And I think there was something like 40 or 50 Indigenous youth from across the province, from like all corners of the province. They came together with adult supporters and community members and Lot. And Brittany was there for sure and was part of the hosting team that put that on. Did an incredible job. And it was an incredible day. It was a really, really successful day. And it was, the youth owned it. The youth owned that day. And it was a really important day of conversations that happened. And a really important space for their voices coming together and some people finding their voice for the first time and talking about, the things that aren't getting talked about with Indigenous youth in this province and in this country. So it was a really important day. And from there, a large group of those youth ended up coming to the Spring Summit, which was a month later. And in the feedback from our Spring Summit, a few Indigenous identified youth stood up in our circle at the end, our closing circle, and said, this is the first time I feel like I've been able to share my culture and not feel like I'm hated for my culture or that I'm othered for my culture. To make amazing jokes about how poorly we danced to the round dance and really just give feedback as to how open and embracing the space was for them to share who they were and to share their culture, which is huge, which is really, really huge. So I think about that in terms of like that voice, like Heartwood allowed that to happen. Heartwood allowed that flow of events and gatherings and youth coming together and sharing to happen. And we also allowed the space for Annie to step up and for Brittany to step up into those spaces and really hold that and share themselves within that as well. So, yeah, it's a little bit of story about the ripple effect of voices. Now I'm skipping ahead, but.